Let's face it, folks, the age-old debate of Windows versus Linux will probably rage long after we're all replaced by AI or Jesus comes back on his white horse. But today, I'm here to play devil's advocate. I know I'm as much of a Linux nerd as the average sysadmin because, after all, I happen to be one. But let's explore why Windows might actually be the better operating system. Now stick around with me here and don't hit that thumbs down button just yet. First up, there's market dominance. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. Windows owns about 75% of the desktop OS market, and there's a good reason for that. From enterprise environments to home users, Windows is everywhere. It's the default. You boot up almost any new laptop and bam, there's Windows. For better or worse, it's familiar, reliable, and backed by Microsoft's ecosystem. Linux, on the other hand, is fragmented into hundreds of distributions, and sure, that diversity is great if you're a hobbyist or a sysadmin, but for the average user, I think it could be a little overwhelming. Now here's the juicy part, security. Yeah, Windows has a long history of exploits. Wanna cry, anyone? But the thing is, Windows survives despite its vulnerabilities. Why? Because Microsoft patches quickly, offers user-friendly updates, and provides enterprise-grade security solutions like Windows Defender. Linux has a smaller attack surface, sure, but let's not kid ourselves. If Linux had even half the exploits that Windows deals with regularly, it would be toast. And Linux doesn't have a global centralized response team like Microsoft does. You're often left relying on your distro maintainers. Hopefully you're on a distro that gets updates and didn't disappear into obscurity. Here's a fun fact. Major retail outlets still use POS systems based on both Windows and Linux. But guess which one dominates? Windows. Why? Because vendors trust Microsoft's ecosystem for long-term support and compatibility. You can argue whether their faith in Windows is a little misplaced, but it doesn't change the facts. Linux-based systems do show up, but they're often tied to niche use cases or custom environments. And sure, Windows XP is still lurking in some cash registers, which makes us cringe, but it only speaks to how ingrained Windows is in global infrastructure. Remember, Linux strength into obscurity is fading fast. Attackers aren't ignoring Linux anymore. It powers cloud services, Internet of Things, and even Android, so this whole security by obscurity thing, soon to be ancient history. You might need to use some sort of antivirus with Linux in the not so distant future, which will probably cause me to look for an alternative. Another area where Windows shines is its perception of usability. Installing software on Windows, click, download, install, done. On Linux, you want to install that app? You better hope your package manager plays nice, and to be fair, on most major distros, they generally do. And if they don't have that particular application, usually there is a sandbox version that you can easily download like snaps or flatpaks. Don't even get me started on dependency conflicts or outdated repositories. On Windows, backwards compatibility is a priority. On Linux, it's like, oh crap, your app isn't compatible with Wayland yet. Too bad. And finally, gaming. Look, I love what Valve is doing with Proton and Steam Deck, but Windows is still king here. Native support, better drivers, and more titles. The gap is closing, but for now, it's no contest. Here's where Linux pulls a sneaky trick out of its sleeve. Hardware support. It may surprise you, but the Linux kernel actually supports more devices and hardware out of the box than Windows. Think about it. Way back in the day, plugging in a new printer or external device, it meant long and frustrating searches for the right driver. You would dig through the manufacturer website, download a sketchy installer, and cross your fingers that it worked. Windows has definitely improved here. Many devices now just work when plugged in, but Linux, it often supports the same devices natively without you lifting a finger. That's because the Linux kernel includes an incredible range of drivers built right into its code base. I mainly have 4 complaints regarding Windows that seem to be universal among users. Let's start with the big one: open source software performance. Sure, you can install OBS Studio, Kdenlive, and GIMP on Windows. They just don't run as smoothly as they do on Linux. Why? Because these tools often are developed with Linux in mind. Windows adds layers of abstraction that can bog down performance or lead to weird bugs. And don't get me started on virtual Oracle bugs. Even with virtualization enabled, spinning up a Linux OS is hit or miss on Windows 11. Meanwhile, on Linux, you got tools like KVM or QEMU that are native, fast, and reliable. 2. A black box of an operating system. Windows is like a fancy car where you're only allowed to look at the dashboard. You want to peek under the hood? Good luck with that. Windows hides so much of its internals behind proprietary code, and if you want to understand what's going on, you're in for hours of training or expensive certifications. On Linux, everything is just transparent. You can open the terminal and see logs, tweak system configurations, and even read source code if you feel so inclined. With Windows, you're stuck waiting for Microsoft to explain or fix whatever's wrong. You might be waiting a while. 3. Development on Windows is a nightmare. If you've ever tried setting up a development environment on Windows, you know the struggle's real. Between dependency hell, conflicting tools, and hoops you have to jump through for things like WSL or Docker, feels like you need an IT degree just to get started. On Linux, development tools like GCC and Python and Git are just baked into the ecosystem. And package managers like AppDNF and Pacman make installing software a breeze, and with Windows, well, it's a labyrinth of installers, system variables, and trial and error troubleshooting. 4. Forced into Microsoft workflow. Let's talk about workflow control, or the lack thereof. Windows forces you into their idea of what a desktop should be. You get the start menu, taskbar, and Microsoft's layout. If you don't like it, well, that's tough luck. You want a completely custom desktop environment? Forget about it! Linux, on the other hand, is all about choice. Whether it's GNOME, KDE, or XFCE, or even something minimalist like i3 or DWM, you can make the desktop fit your workflow, not the other way around. With Windows, you're locked into whatever Microsoft decides is best for you. Such a benevolent dictator, aren't they? So is Windows a better operating system than Linux? Well, that depends on your needs. But here's the thing, Windows didn't get where it is today by being perfect. It got there by being good enough, accessible, and constantly evolving. Linux? It's a powerhouse, no doubt about it. But it still has some growing up to do if it ever wants to compete on the same level. Maybe choice isn't such an advantage if we want to get to that next level. I personally wouldn't be in that camp though. Let me know in the comments where you stand on this debate, Windows or Linux. Who's your pick? And hey, hit that like button if you're still rooting for your favorite penguin. Later, nerds.